Hello, it's time once again for another episode of Out of Time Reviews, the show that still doesn't have any opening credits or graphics because I never get many chances to do so. Back again, it's me, Andrew Parker, senior writer and film critic for thegate.ca, giving you another rundown of what's good, not so good in theaters and on streaming. This week is a busy one for me as I'll once again be covering the Hot Docs Canadian International Documentary Festival, which is running from now until May 3rd. Over at the Gate right now, you can check out my interview with director Michelle Mama and queer music icon Carol Pope as we talk about this year's opening night film, Anti-Diva, The Carol Pope Confessions, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. And we'll have a video with excerpts from our conversation when the film opens everywhere sometime over the summer, so stay tuned for that. I also have a bunch of brief written reviews for the selection of films that are playing this year, and I always have fun doing that, so be sure to check that out if you are interested or you get a chance. But for now, we got 5 new movies to talk about this week. We'll be starting off with Michael, the buzzed-about biopic about Michael Jackson. Then we'll get into Fuze, a fast-paced thriller and heist movie from the director of Hell or High Water. Erupcja, a somewhat experimental look at fate and romance, co-starring Charlie XCX. Mother Mary, a psychological thriller that pits Anne Hathaway as a pop princess against Michaela Cole as her former friend and costume designer. And finally, a look at Canadian filmmaker Sophie Ramvari's award-winning semi-autobiographical drama, Blue Heron. Like, share, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Grab yourself a snack. Let's look at some movies.
You're confident. You're strong. You're beautiful. You're the greatest of all time.
Let me tell you something. In this life, you're either a winner or you're a loser. Y'all want to work in a steel mill like me for the rest of your days?
No, sir.
Yeah, because I sure as hell don't. Y'all willing to fight for it?
Yes, sir.
I need to hear you a little louder. Y'all willing to fight for it?
Yes, sir.
Ready whenever you are, Michael.
Michael, like its subject, is a movie that finds itself in a strange place. Mired in post-production hell and controversy that led to almost half the movie being cut and saved for a potential second installment, this latest project from Training Day, The Equalizer, and Southpaw director Antoine Fuqua has had a rough and hobbled road to the big screen. A lot of those cuts and trims are also tied to the complicated legacy that Jackson left behind. It's hard not to think about those latter years and about what Jackson became while watching what's essentially a no-frills, glossy parade of his greatest hits, sprinkled with touches of biographical detail that are meant to present him in the best light possible. I'm not going to get into all of that here for a few reasons, but for a great summation of what happened behind the scenes of Michael, I would suggest reading Mark Bonelli's tremendous piece from the April 14th issue of the New York Times Magazine titled The Rise and Fall and Rise of Michael Jackson. One reason why I'm not going to expressly get into the more controversial and depressing aspects of Jackson's latter life is because John Logan, a decent writer who should know better than to deliver something this thin, has decided that very little of that matters. He'll give Fuqua plenty of foreshadowing to play with however the director pleases, but mostly this is going to stick to a single era from 1968 to 1988. And the other main reason why I won't get into too much of that is because a critic can only grade the film that's put in front of them. They can't criticize something that doesn't exist. If this film wants to end on a bizarrely chipper cliffhanger, that's its choice. I can't review a blank space, but I can comment that the space exists. Michael Jackson's nephew, Jafar Jackson, slides his hand into the sequin-covered glove of his uncle, who was once known as the King of Pop. Fuqua and Logan start their version of the Jackson story off in the late 1960s in Gary, Indiana, where Michael's father, Joseph, played by Coleman Domingo, is pushing hard for his kids to become a successful family band. Young Michael, played by Giuliano Valdi, takes the brunt of Joseph's criticism and abuse. The band becomes successful, but once Michael comes of age and starts thinking more like an adult, he desires to forge his own path away from Joseph's domineering control. Despite having tremendous success with the likes of his Off the Wall and Thriller albums, and having a team of lawyers, producers, and record executives willing to back him up, Michael still can't seem to fully wiggle his way out from beneath Joseph's tyrannical thumb. On one hand, and from a filmmaking standpoint, I can't fault the makers of Michael for the choice to focus on a single era of their subject's career. Some of the best biopics eschew a lot of cliches by keeping things simple and not trying to pack an entire complicated life into a single volume. Similar credit also has to go to the filmmakers for not trying to mount big, corny scenes that show exactly where the inspiration for some of the biggest hits came from. Everything that the inexplicably loved Bohemian Rhapsody did wrong, Michael manages to get somehow right. Michael's express purpose is to build sympathy for its subject and trot out a slew of hits that are wonderfully staged recreations of past glories. On those levels, and those levels specifically, Michael is getting the job done, and admirably so. I can think of plenty of musician biopics that are a lot more of a laughable slog to get through than Michael, even if that is kind of damning this with faint praise. And when it comes to the musical numbers, of which there are many, Fuqua brings a lot of energy. The second unit's doing the Lord's work with more crowd reaction shots than are advisable for any motion picture, and Jafar Jackson has all of Michael's trademark moves and mannerisms down to a science, even if he isn't providing the singing voice a great deal of the film. Jafar Jackson also does a fine job of capturing Michael's shyness, confidence, and charisma. Even if they don't have the same speaking voice, the younger Jackson understands the unique cadence of his older relative. It's a performance that's bound to dazzle those hungry for a glimpse of anything close to the real thing again, but the more interesting performance here belongs to young Valdi, a tremendous young performer who also does some exceptional character work in the film's earlier stages. The main points of Michael are to shine a spotlight on the artist's biggest successes and none of his failures, while also trying to explain that a lot of Jackson's many faults are a result of Joseph's abuse and of being robbed of having a real childhood. To an extent, this defense of Jackson does work. It's something rather than nothing. But with almost every living member of the Jackson family and the legal executor of the estate, lawyer John Branca, portrayed in the film by Miles Teller, there's not going to be much in the way of controversy outside of slight teases about his Peter Pan complex, both the mental one and the literal theme park embodiment of that comes later. It should be noted that the film strangely occupies a space where Janet Jackson, one of the only members of the family not listed as a producer, never existed. Don't expect to hear Janet's name uttered even a single time. Then again, none of Michael's other siblings are given much of a voice here other than offering lightweight commentary on everything they see. They're interchangeable except for Jermaine, who by necessity drops out of the story for a bit, and Tito, who at one point in the film wears a baseball cap with his name on it, so you could say, hey look, that's Tito. Nia Long fares slightly better as Michael's adoring mother, but her relationship to Joseph and her sons is the kind of standard stuff you'd see in any movie, skin deep, lacking in detail, and only mildly heartwarming. Character is not the strong suit of Michael. Even some of the more formative relationships that Jackson had in the industry are boiled down to single scenes that are good enough but hint at so much more. The best scene in the film comes early when young Michael is in the studio with producer Berry Gordy, played here by Lorenz Tate, and Jackson finds somewhat of a surrogate father figure in him that wants to teach Michael more about the industry than Joseph ever would. Another similar scene occurs when Michael links up with Quincy Jones, played by Kendrick Sampson, another teaming that would prove formative for Michael. These scenes hint at something greater and more cathartic, but the film sticks to its guns and makes sure that Michael's struggles with Joseph are always front and center. Mostly, characters just observe Michael up close and make facial expressions whenever they feel sorry for him. Michael's personal security guard, Bill, played by Kalen Durrell Jones, is such a character, as is Miles Teller's. People who dispense tidbits of sage advice, but are mostly used for reaction shots. And it's hard to blame Fuqua and Logan for that focus. It not only makes Michael a lot more sympathetic in the eyes of the viewer, but it also allows for Coleman Domingo to shine in the film's villain role. Under some decent prosthetic makeup and looking around through contact lenses that give Joseph an almost Gollum-like stare, Domingo commands the screen like how Joe Jackson would demand respect and compliance from his family. In terms of raw acting talent, Domingo towers over everyone else in Michael, including Jafar Jackson. He runs the Jackson 5 like a military instructor. None of the good points I mentioned, however, are enough to make Michael feel like anything more than the bright spots in a project that feels overly calculated and unfinished. This is another step towards the rehabilitation of MJ's image, which has been tarnished for the past 20 years, both before and after his tragic passing. The film's corny sentimentality and rosy, risk-averse perspective are merely a vehicle for selling a visual equivalent of a greatest hits album. Sure, there's room for darker moments in Michael's life, like his recovery from severe burns sustained while filming a Pepsi ad, and everything involving Joseph, but there's also space for a menagerie of CGI animals and a laughably overlong segment that seems to suggest Jackson solved gang warfare in Los Angeles by bringing Crips and Bloods together on the set of his video for Beat It. The film is so focused on high points and keeping the pace as quick as possible that it ultimately becomes meaningless. If this film is successful, there will probably be a follow-up that profiles Michael from 1988, where this film ends with Jackson on his bad tour to his sudden passing in 2009. Given the people on the production team behind Michael being so close to their subject's estate and what's come to light about how much was cut from this project already for legal and pacing reasons, it will probably be a little darker, but just as sanitized. It won't have as much of a banger soundtrack to help ease its burdens either. The vast majority of people want to hear Billie Jean, Thriller, and ABC more than things like Black and White, Remember the Time, and Rock My World. Maybe the producers of Michael should stop while they're ahead financially, since this is likely to be a sensation, or at least a cult favorite, no matter what critics say about it. This is a 4 out of 10 for me. I honestly don't hate the film because there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm here, but I can't recommend it to anyone who wants more than just a soundtrack.
Colonel.
We've got UXO in Westminster. I'm just sending you through the pictures now.
World War II. Looks like a 1,000-pounder. We'll need an 800-metre radius perimeter.
I'll see you on the dance floor.
This area is being evacuated.
Could it, blow any minute?
Theoretically, yes.
Cordon secure. Nothing's moving.
We're on.
Moving on to something far less controversial, but also not all that great, Fuze is the latest film from director David Mackenzie, who showed so much promise with the likes of Starred Up and Hell or High Water, but seems to have fallen into a rut making predictable thrillers that move at a quick pace so the viewer doesn't have time to register that they don't make a lick of sense. Fuze doesn't waste any time getting started, launching right into the story of a construction crew unearthing an unexploded World War II-era missile buried in the heart of London's Westminster district. Authorities call in military bomb specialist Aaron Taylor Johnson and his team of experts to help defuse the situation. The disposal effort hits a terrifying snag, however, when the bomb appears to have a timer attached to it that could go off either within seconds of it being discovered or sometime within the next 48 hours or so. But members of the bomb squad begin to question whether or not the device they're looking at is the real deal or not. And curiously, in the same blast radius, a bank robbery is taking place led by Theo James and Sam Worthington. I will admit that the brisk nature of the opening stages of Fuze are entertaining. Mackenzie ping-pongs back and forth between the heist and bomb squad threads with ease and energy. What I won't admit, however, is that Fuze and its twist upon twist upon twist upon twist upon twist pacing ever had me fooled for a moment. Much like Mackenzie's other recent disappointment, the Riz Ahmed and Lily James starring Relay, Fuze is built upon a big reveal so glaringly obvious that it only works if you've never seen a movie in your life. The film's big villain might as well have a giant flashing neon sign over their head. That's how little Fuze is fooling anybody. But the film ambles around for over 90 minutes, trying to make the viewer think that a few other superfluous wrinkles in the plan will somehow change anything and throw someone for a loop. Fuze is trying to look and sound the part of an intelligent thriller with all of its technical jargon and high-tech heist hijinks, but it can't answer basic questions. Like, why does a missile that would likely detonate on impact have a timer? Why does the leader of the bomb squad seemingly refuse to listen to everyone else around him? How did the heist team set all of this up? And if they did plant the device, how did they sneak it into what was surely a heavily guarded construction site to plant this thing? And more importantly, where in the hell did they even get a missile from? Sure, parts of these things make sense when the reveal arrives, but it doesn't add up at the end. Fuze just wants to race through its basic thriller trappings as fast as possible. If you're coming for character development, you won't get any of that until the film's epilogue of all things, and by that point the movie isn't telling the viewer anything that they haven't already pieced together, and part of it is told only because the villain was nice enough to leave one of those crazy person scrapbook manifestos just lying about for the chief investigator, played by a wasted Gugu Babatara, just to happen upon it at the right time. Johnson is fine, James is fine, Worthington's whatever. None of them have to deliver a real performance because they're all movable plot points and less than real human beings. It takes a lot to shut your brain off and enjoy Fuze once it passes the halfway point, because by then, if you're smart, the game is well and truly up. Again, I guess if you don't figure this out before the characters do, it'll work, but for me, this is a 5 out of 10. While a lot of this annoyed me, at least it didn't take up too much of my time.
Dziękuję.
Dziękuję. And how do you say you're welcome?
Nie ma za co.
Nie ma za co. And I love you?
I didn't expect Warsaw to be so beautiful. Is it as romantic as you remembered?
Did I say that?
We might have an issue. Seems our flight's been cancelled. Volcanic ash.
You know, I think I'm gonna go and explore, actually. I met a friend in Warsaw.
Nell,
Why are you here?
Mount Etna erupted yesterday. Can I come up?
From filmmaker Pete O's, the loose and nimble Erupcja harkens back to cinema of the French New Wave, albeit with more postmodern stylistic choices, embellishments, and plotting. Edited, shot, directed, and produced by O's, Erupcja is a close collaboration with his performers, with the 4 primary leads also getting writing credits. The film starts with a basic outline and then is shot chronologically, with a narrator filling in backstory during post-production. It's a fascinating way to make a film, but also a big gamble, and it's one that pays off nicely here. Bethany, played by Charlie XCX, and Rob, played by Will Madden, are Londoners traveling around Europe. They've been living together as a couple for over a year, and Rob is on the verge of proposing. Their latest stop is Warsaw, Poland, a place that Bethany has been to several times in the past, but they're only due to spend a single night there. The trip ends up getting extended unexpectedly when their flight back to London is cancelled due to volcanic ash in the air from the eruption of Mount Etna in Italy. This delay gives Bethany a chance to seek out Nell, a flower shop owner played by Lena Gora, a woman with whom she has a deep and close history. As Bethany comes back into Nell's life, the florist's life is transformed, putting her at odds with her new girlfriend. Meanwhile, Rob is left virtually alone in Warsaw, wondering where his intended fiancée has vanished to. Erupcja isn't beholden to any single defining genre trait. It could be interpreted as a romance, but most of the love on display here is of the doom variety, which probably also explains why there are several references to Shakespeare and A Midsummer Night's Dream here. It's not played as a comedy, and there are too many bright spots to call it a tragedy. Also, the actual romance that could exist between any of these partners isn't fully glimpsed by the viewer. A lot is left to the imagination, and the feelings that pervade throughout Erupcja are fleeting sadness and pronounced melancholy. It's really a film that's more concerned with examining the whims of fate, strange coincidences, and the impact that people can have on one's life in short bursts of time. Jacek Zubel plays the part of the omniscient narrator, filling the audience in on information and backstory they couldn't glean from the characters themselves, making the whole thing feel a bit like an adult fairy tale, but in a good way and without all the whimsy that seemingly comes with such descriptors. It's made for a specific kind of viewer in mind, those who like quieter moments where they can parse what characters are thinking about when they aren't speaking aloud. It's a film where silence is meant to be read into as much as the dialogue, with Warsaw providing a nice bohemian backdrop for such a scenario. Because of the film's improvisational nature, there are some nuts and bolts elements of the plotting that don't make a ton of sense, but the emphasis here is placed firmly on human interaction, and Oz's primary leads have wonderful chemistry around each other. Gora has a gruff sort of charm that makes her a likable object of affection and attention. Charlie XCX plays the moral ambiguity of her character rather nicely, making one wonder if she's genuinely trying to make connections with other people, or if she's scared of commitment, or even if she's being somewhat selfish. And Madden finds layers of complexity in a character that's meant to play like a basic, safe, nice guy who doesn't outwardly show big displays of emotions, but has bigger feelings than anyone else there. They make a compelling trio worth following through the streets of Warsaw. Erupcja is also a marvelously brief film, clocking in at just over 70 minutes and still feeling like not anything is missing. There's an elegant sort of simplicity at work here, and a compelling picture of romantic empathy and compassion that's more entrancing than something that might have taken a steamier or cornier approach. This one gets a 7 out of 10 from me. What a nice surprise this was.
And you've come crawling back to me because you know I can do better.
Yes.
Because I, above all others, know you.
Because I didn't know where else to go.
Truly.
Yes.
Will you let me do whatever I like?
Yes. But...
Will you do exactly as I say?
Yes, within...
And will you wear what I make?
Yes.
And can you stop time?
Just did.
Mother Mary, the latest film from eclectic writer-director David Lowery, has one of the best first halves of any film this year and one of the worst second halves of all time. What starts out as a compelling, witty, sharply realized psychological drama about former friends turned bitter rivals suddenly stops around the halfway point to become an ethereal ghost story built around a painfully obvious metaphor for the artistic process that's molasses slow and overstuffed with ill-fitting parts that never go together. Few films have so spectacularly wasted their early potential like Mother Mary does, but in some deranged way, that's almost what makes this more artistically admirable, if, regrettably, more than a tad pretentious. Anne Hathaway stars in the titular role, a successful, artful pop star in the Lady Gaga mold who has a freak-out just a few days before she's due to have a big comeback show, several years after a harrowing on-stage incident that might not have been an accident. Mary freaks out because one of her elaborate stage outfits feels all wrong for a new song she plans on debuting, one that she jokingly thinks will be one of the best songs in the history of music. Mary flees from Los Angeles to the outskirts of London, where her former costume designer, Sam Anselm, is busy getting ready for a big runway show. Sam, played by Michaela Cole, is none too pleased to see Mary. Once the closest of friends, they had a falling out a decade ago and haven't spoken since. Mary begs Sam for a new dress, and eventually the designer caves in, but with the proviso that everything has to be on her terms, not those of the pop diva. For about 3/4 of Mother Mary, it's just Hathaway and Cole carrying out lengthy conversations about each of their legacies, with the latter leading into the axe they have to grind and the former cowering out of fear for what might happen if she doesn't get this dress made. Lowry, best known for the likes of The Green Knight, A Ghost Story, and the surprisingly great remake of Pete's Dragon, is at his best creatively whenever he provides his leads with reams of poetic dialogue that they can sink their teeth into while building out their characters. Hathaway shines more in her grand performance numbers, belting out songs written by the likes of Charlie XCX, Jack Antonoff, and FKA Twigs, the latter of whom appears later in the film as a medium of sorts. On stage, Mary is made to look unstoppable, but in the presence of the aggrieved and aggravated Sam, Hathaway shifts into a more subservient tenor that's entrancing in its own unique way. Mother Mary also offers possibly the best big screen encapsulation yet of Cole's tremendous acting chops. She commands the screen in a way that oddly reminds me of Alan Rickman. When Cole says something, she does it with pitch-perfect emphasis, diction, and meaning. You will absolutely hang on her every word, intonation, and facial expression. While Lowry doesn't make the reasons why Sam hates Mary so much obvious, the viewer can tell through Cole's expertly calibrated performance that she means every word she's saying, and that there has to be a reason for all of this animosity. But that's where Mother Mary goes ultimately adrift in a big way. Lowry kind of shrugs off the fascinating tete-a-tete that made up the film's first half by offering up an unsatisfactory explanation, and then shifting gears so forcefully into a left-field ghost story that the engine driving the script dies where it stands. What was once a satisfying, intelligent, and entertaining showdown has to be resolved so these former foes can come together to fight a similar enemy that's been plaguing them both. It's all an elaborate cover to tell a story that's essentially about writer's block, and how hard it can be to literally and metaphorically pull inspiration out of oneself. This section of the film is relentlessly hammy. The dialogue, which worked so well in the first half, sounds silly in the context of what's now essentially an elevated genre picture. So steeped in metaphor is this half of the film that the dialogue now includes bits where Lowry, speaking through the characters that no longer sound like themselves, literally explains individual items and the meanings he wants to ascribe to them. Mother Mary stops being a work of art and starts becoming a lecture in art appreciation aimed at an audience that Lowry doesn't think will get the point and that likely won't be invested in what they're seeing to begin with. It's a challenge to get through the back half of Mother Mary, both in terms of plotting, nonsensical pacing, and how irritating the material becomes. But I do offer this proviso. If you are someone who likes movies that are obviously made to please no one other than the person who authored it, this will be a treat even if you don't end up enjoying it. The film literally makes the point loudly and proudly that the only reason for art to be made is to please the artist. And the real tragedy here is what happens when brilliant minds get stuck for one reason or another, be it success, trauma, or burnout. But if that's the case, and you do like that kind of big swing that doesn't give a damn about audience expectations, can you still stomach it if it comes from someone who's literally spelling out their shot in no uncertain terms? Do you find a filmmaker being upfront about not knowing where to go next refreshing or insulting? That'll be the dividing line for most people with Mother Mary, but personally I just find it disappointing. I'm not mad, I'm disappointed. While the film's marketing has been heavy on the soundtrack, one of the film's best jokes happens to be that many of the songs are deliberately pushed into the background of the film's intricately woven fabric. And speaking of fabric, the costume design is expectedly top-notch, gorgeous, vibrant, and practically tactile in appearance. The production design, both of Sam's shop and Mary's elaborate stage shows, is also worth mentioning for its merits. Like the leads, these departments are helping to add some depth and sheen to Lowry's uncharacteristically sloppy approach. So, if a film has a 9 out of 10 first half and a 2 out of 10 second half, I guess I have to split this one down the middle and give it a 5 out of 10. There are excellent things in Mother Mary, but not enough to offset all of the negatives. But this is also the definition of something where your mileage with this will extremely vary.
Becky, stop it! Okay. Ah! Okay, stick it up. I tried, stick it up. Don't hold on, get up. 3, 2, everyone target me. Okay. Not yet. Now. Yeah, it's really wet.
Can you hold this one?
I've had the pleasure of seeing writer-director Sophie Ramvari's Blue Heron 3 times now, and it gets better with every single watch. A devastating and poignant drama that's bursting with equal parts sadness and gratitude, Blue Heron is nothing short of a masterpiece. Delivering her first feature-length effort after years of producing exceptional short films, Ramvari establishes herself as one of the most intriguing and thoughtful artists in Canadian cinema, not just of the current moment, but of all time. Blue Heron is that great. A semi-autobiographical work, Blue Heron focuses on a Hungarian family that has recently moved to Vancouver Island. A mother, a father, a young girl named Sasha, played by Eyul Guven, and her 3 older brothers. The eldest son, Jeremy, played by Edek Bedos, is prone to acting out and causing scenes. He's caught shoplifting, he willfully ignores his parents' admonishments, he disappears without a trace sometimes, he's destructive, and it's hard exactly to say what's wrong with him. A psychologist suggests that Jeremy could have oppositional defiant disorder, but the teenager never gets a firm diagnosis. Sasha's mother, played beautifully by Aringo Reiti, thinks their family is in a constant state of crisis while Jeremy is around. Sasha is told that it's probably not a great idea to have friends over for dinner, and while the youngster can see what's going on with her older brother and the viewer shares her perspective, the mental anguish that plagues Jeremy remains forever a mystery. At a certain point, Blue Heron makes a time jump and follows adult Sasha, now played by Amy Zimmer, who's now making a documentary film to hopefully understand Jeremy better now that she's an adult. Sasha and her parents now admit that they spent so much of their lives looking down upon Jeremy and his actions, but that they also have so many regrets that they could have done more to help him. Would Jeremy have an easier time with his family today than he would have 20 years ago? Ramvari maturely and poetically suggests that no one could ever really know for sure, and that all families, siblings, and loved ones can do in such situations is to try their best amid all the nagging questions and second-guessing. What if I noticed signs of trouble earlier on? How could I love someone who's inhabiting such a dark space that I could never relate to or hope to understand? Where could things go so wrong? Did I love too much or not enough? Did I let my own emotions get the better of me, or did I let someone else's have too much impact on my own mental health? And does analyzing any of this with the benefit of hindsight help or make the wounds grow deeper? Again, no one really knows for sure, but Ramvari, who has lived with something similar in her own family background, has boundless empathy for anyone who has had to watch loved ones struggle in silence. Blue Heron is not a film only for adults who remember what it's like to be a child who couldn't comprehend what mental illness looks like. It's also for adults who could never be fully prepared for a child or another loved one to be unwell and not have any sort of diagnosis. And it's for those who struggle without ever knowing what's wrong with themselves. As the film bridges the gap between past and present, a poignant overlap takes place and everyone is held with a perfect amount of kindness, love, and respect, no matter how mixed the feelings get. Rumvari has made a film where sharing memories and parsing them in front of an audience becomes a display of unfiltered love and a radical act of self-care. Rumvari's mature approach throughout Blue Heron is the type of work that should be studied in schools, not just in terms of its exceptional filmmaking craft, but because of the honest, bracing, and humane nature of its subject matter. Even if you've been lucky enough to have avoided dealing with any sort of mental or physical illness in your family, it's impossible not to be moved by Rumvari's work. Young Guven is a natural-born observer in the leading role, and although he doesn't speak much throughout the course of the film, Beddoes is able to convey equal parts warmth and fear as Sasha recalls her early years, remembering moments both beautiful and terrifying. The cinematography from Maya Bankovic adds a lot of texture to Blue Heron without ever trying to look like a mashup between two eras, and that consistency of vision is much appreciated. The editing from Kurt Walker is exceptional, especially when one considers that Rumvari's delicate narrative is fueled almost as much by its missing pieces as it is by the core memories on display. The only reason Blue Heron won't make my best of the year list this year is because it already ranked very high on my list last year when it was shown to me for awards consideration purposes. If it were to rank on this year's list, it would be number 1 right now, and there wouldn't be anything close in the way of competition. For the first time on this series, Blue Heron is getting a 10 out of 10. This is not to be missed, and if it comes to your area, be sure to see it in a cinema to feel all of the encompassing impact of it. But what did you think of any of this week's films? Leave a comment below, subscribe because it helps, check out one of my other shows or interviews, head on over to The Gate to see more of my written work, and be sure to tune in next week for even more. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and have a great week.